All right, I will kick us off. You guys, this is the Roundtable about the cloud. I promise if you're just joining us, that is what this is about today. Good morning to anyone joining us from the West Coast. Good afternoon. Maybe you're enjoying your lunch right now. If you're on the East Coast like us, and if you're joining us from Europe, wow. Thanks for spending your night with us.
Yeah.
So without further ado, just to introduce myself real quick. Hi, I'm Dana. I do corporate communications here at BlueCat. Lucky enough to get to put this thing on for you. You're watching the third in a series of critical conversations on critical infrastructure. I don't know what else to say right now for those folks who joined us for the first two. But for those new, this is all about talking about topics that we think are important in the IT space, giving people a chance to connect and trade notes over what it is that really matters to the job that you do. It's a completely vendor agnostic, sort of product agnostic thing. It's part of something we do in the Network VIP channel, which Christian on this call helps run. Essentially, this is, if you're not already part of it, and I'm assuming 90% of you will be, this is an open community for professionals in IT like yourselves to be able to trade notes and connect, maybe commiserate a little, empower one another, share some photography if that's your thing. So thank you for joining us. Today, we will be talking all about sort of the hybrid cloud and how to make it work between two seemingly opposing teams or two seemingly opposing approaches and technologies. And I think we've got a great panel here today who really come from different sides of this situation to be able to shed some light for you and hopefully give you a chance to walk away with things that you can apply in your work or just things that you can continue to think about as you navigate this in your own career over the next couple of years. We're going to start with a Q&A portion. We're not going to start with a Q&A portion. We're going to end with one of those. So we've allocated about 15 minutes at the end of it for that. In the meantime, I'm going to pass it off to our moderator, Andrew. We're going to get to know some of our panelists. And I'll just make a note that you can watch this thing in speaker view. That's probably the best way to do it. You're going to hear things that you're going to want to remember. And so I encourage you to use it. And maybe you want to just open up your Slack application and sort of keep it open concurrently to this. Any quotes or nuggets that you feel are important or insights, please do just send them into the general channel. You'll see actually a flurry of activity there between a couple polls as well, where we want to take some of your input and feed it back into the conversation. So I do encourage you to also use the Slack that we've got today. Without further ado, why don't I pass it off to our moderator and BlueCat Chief Strategy Officer, Andrew Wertkin.
Thank you, Dana. All right, well, let's start with just introducing the panelists today. And so why don't we start with Bart?
Hey, hello, network friends. My name is Bart Castle. I'm a cloud computing subject matter expert and a trainer and consultant. I work for CBT Nuggets, making training content, and then I also run my own consulting business on the side as well, where I help small and medium and enterprise businesses tackle cloud troubles, much like we'll be discussing today. So it's nice to chat with everybody. I'm looking forward to digging into this important conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Bart. Karun?
Hey, hello everybody. This is Karun here. I work at Loblaw's Digital as a TPM for SRE and DevOps team, and I deal with cloud on my every day-to-day basis. So you guys got a hint which side I'm on, but let's see. Super excited for this conversation, and in my free time, I also volunteer for TEDx Toronto.
All right. Thank you. David? David.
Oh,
Mr. Muscat.
he's speaking, but we're not
Muscat is
hearing
on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Two mutes here dealing with. Dave Muscat with IBM Watson Health. I'm an infrastructure architect. I've been working with BlueCat in our private cloud area for the past several years and making our turn into the hybrid world.
And you build RF speedboats.
Oh,
BlueCat
yeah.
logos on them.
Oh, yes.
Awesome. Thank you for joining, David. Laz?
Hi, my name is Lazaro Periera. I am a senior staff engineer at fintech called Abrigo. We're a SaaS provider, although I am speaking just for myself today. I pretty much have a pretty storied past in a variety of different verticals. So, and for the most part, I've been an on-prem guy, so you guys know exactly where I'm probably going to sit. Glad to meet everybody.
Awesome, thank you. And last but certainly not least, Mohan. Ooh,
Mute problem again.
Mohan is on mute. There he is.
Okay, you good now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Mohan Pursaud. Sorry for the muting issue. Been around the block when it comes to IT in its infancy, anywhere from dial-up to .coms to acquisitions to networking to retailing to cloud. Key services have always been one of the most important thing about how to remain consistency. It doesn't matter what you do in today's technology, it's how you're going to operationalize it, put some controls around it, and you can give somebody a thumbs up to say, yes, I'm confident, I'm operating as secure as I possibly can. So interesting roundtable around DNS, DSCP, and IPA. So look forward to it.
Super, thank you. All right, well, let's jump right into it then. So, obviously, I think it goes without saying that enterprises are investing a great deal in cloud and cloud technologies, both from lift and shift type strategies to building brand new applications and services with cloud native technology, migrating stuff out of data centers, and that's creating sort of the premise here where there's different teams of specialists and different teams of IT professionals and software developers and network engineers that tend to be working on one side or the other. And we've talked to a lot of companies over times that have been struggling with that and struggling with harmonizing and creating architectures across. And so we thought we'd dig into some of the reasons why and how we can approach there. And some of this we focus just around DNS, obviously, because we're BlueCat, but we always have this question of who should actually own DNS when it's used in the cloud, and what does that actually mean? So with all of that promise and with all of these concerns, let's sort of just start with what impact is the cloud actually having on IT today? How can we think about that impact? And anybody can jump in.
I think one of the challenges that we have, or companies face with the cloud, it doesn't have to be a challenge. I think it's a matter of consistency. So cloud, Andrew, you and I had some good conversations around this in our first round in our first conversation. I see cloud as an extension of the current network, given I come from a financial.com and so forth. And I say that because part of it is, it doesn't matter where your endpoints are. It's like your firewall. You have a source and a destination for everything. What you go through it, whether it's protocols or ports and all that data, you have to have some controls around it because your destination could be anywhere in this world. It doesn't matter. You follow the clients and the clients follow you. But from a consistency perspective, it starts with your standards. It starts with your security and your governance. And then you look at your process, your people, your tools, and so forth. And then you say, okay, I'm moving my service from A to B, and B could be where I know or where I don't even know where it is, or I trust somebody is managing my endpoint. What are you going to do from a basically operationalize it, and how are you going to look at it from a security perspective? What's important to you? What data are you putting out there? How important is it to you to grow your business? And how does your client see you evolving into this type of a technology and a roadmap? So you have to put a couple of things in place to basically understand how you're going to answer all those questions. The more important you are, the more from a SOX governance compliance, the more you are going to have a very, very binded relationship with your architecture, your design, your support, and your partner. It doesn't matter what cloud partner you decide to go with.
Right. So from that perspective, Mohan, the cloud is an extension to the data center, and the processes we've had in the past around governance and compliance and security might be actioned a little differently, but basically it's It's now just part of the larger IT fabric, and so therefore it falls under similar processes, which I think is exactly what those trying to drive a lot of innovation in the cloud don't want to hear, right? It's perhaps a different perspective there, and maybe we can get that other side from one of our panelists.
No, I think the one of the impacts that I've seen is the lowering of the bar of entry to get into accessing something like resources. That's what the cloud has really brought into that. And that has sort of like, if you're from a SOX compliance, as you were saying, you're looking at this on a compliance side, you have to have a very heavy hand when it comes to the cloud versus a company that doesn't have compliance, where they have the exact opposite. They have no they can spin up whatever they want whenever they want. It gives a sense of freedom. I think that's what's really is bringing some change there. For those of us in the compliance space, I being in finance, and I've sat in lots of different compliance spaces, it's much more different. It is truly more of an extension of your data center, because you have to meet those compliance requirements. So you still have to build, maybe not exactly the same way as you do on-prem, but you have to build with all of that baggage following you, versus someone that's developing the next Uber, right? Who is more free. They don't have to worry about that stuff. They can build whatever they want. So there's like a little bit of a dichotomy there that has happened. And so there's two paths we're taking right now, which is on the more compliance side, you're seeing a lot more heavy-handedness from teams and from security and from more of a business architecture space, making sure that you follow the guidelines. And then you have this other path where you have these other companies where it's like, hey, spin up, spin fast, and fail fast.
I'd have to challenge that a little bit there. Only the lowering of the bar piece. The part that I would bring up would be, when we think about zero trust architectures, this is a very hot term that's out right now, this implicit deny model. I think in a lot of ways, cloud computing vendors make us measure our ability to actually execute against zero trust, because as a service provider, I mean, they have to absolutely implement that as a foundational part of their model. And so for a lot of organizations, it's not so much a question of can we implement with zero trust with cloud, but how do we integrate our maybe not completely targeted and delivered yet zero trust architectures? Because when the API is the king and your gateway to everything, there is no half-ass zero trust. You have got to get it right. It's tokenized and it's continually established, verified, and enforced. So I do think there are some of those pieces that raise its sophistication. But then you're talking about the integration game, which is of course a classic peril for lots of us, whether that be on-prem or whether that be a simple web service or whether it be a complete infrastructure provider like AWS or Google or Azure.
Yeah, and I'm referring more to the fact of like someone being able to take certainly, like a simple virtual machine, and if you have the rights to do it, you can do anything to it.
Oh, sure.
You're not in your corporate data center where you don't have access to something like, let's say, vSphere, KVM, whatever is running in the data center. You're in the cloud. Someone gave you an account. I didn't give you I didn't build a complete role for you, and now you're clicking away, and you've built yourself a box with 100% trust. So that's where the bar is, and making it easy, which is great. I mean, it really does help out, because there's companies out there that don't have the ability to spin up an entire IT department. So for you as a startup, as a small company, I mean, the cloud is a game changer for you. You click, you go, and you're off. You're making money versus, having to spin up a whole DC. That's kind of where I was going with.
Yeah, it's also like
valid.
Karun?
Okay. Yeah. It's also what I would like to pitch in, like echo to what Bart said, is IAC, right? Like that's where IAC comes in, where it can make this part a little tougher or a little stricter, right? You submit MRs, and until and unless your MR gets approved, you cannot do anything to the infra level, at least, right? At a higher, if you're talking about like a control to a entire VM, right? Everything you want to do, you submit an MR. Until your MR gets approved, there you go. You cannot do anything, right? Even if you have the right rights. So I feel like that's those options of tweaking into the security level of how you want to provide the access is something that you can like easily control at a cloud level.
Right.
All of that boils down to is your policies, your procedures, and your practices.
And I think that's one of the key differences, right? So obviously, whether it's compliance or security, I mean, the general requirements remain somewhat similar across these different, areas of infrastructure. But how I'm going to go about approaching meeting those requirements is going to be quite different, and that's part of, I think, the innovation on the cloud side is I can drive I can basically be generative almost in what I'm doing, or create a programmable infrastructure and the appropriate policy so that people can't stray outside of different areas and still be able to do stuff quickly. But you still need to meet the same requirements. And I think sometimes people, if you have to meet the same requirements, then we need to do it the same way. And that's the general fallacy. You certainly don't want Wild West. That's not going to work. I don't care what kind of company you are. You're going to spend too much, and you're going to create security vulnerabilities all over the place, and you're going to create infrastructure that's going to fail. You're going to have lots of problems. And you certainly don't want to wait for, the VMware guy to, actually go provision your machine. You want to go do that automatically. So it's using cloud technology to meet the same general requirements, at least from a business level.
Yeah, I would totally tee off of that and say whenever I look at really big successful vendors that I've worked with, just to throw one name out there, Discover Card was a really impressive shop to work with, very heavily AWS orchestrated, but real early on, they prioritized security control automation, like the entire gamut of what that would look like. They recognize if you're going to get the value of an automated service, whether this be in premise or with a cloud vendor, you cannot have manual controls applied to an automated system. You have to have sufficiently automated controls as well. And in almost every case, organizations that can automate their networks and automate their controls are so much more successful in the types of cloud integration that they achieve. So I totally agree there, Andrew, as well.
So yeah, and I think part of it too is you start off with, if we're talking at an enterprise level, biggest value for your buck is to outsource into the cloud. So you have a purpose, you have some functionality you want to achieve. The same level of scrutiny you go through contractually with your clients on what you are going to commit to, the same level of scrutiny you go through with your cloud provider and what they are going to provide, what you need, what they are going to provide you with. You bind the two of those together, and then you determine basically what are your core business fundamentals, what's important to you, and how are you going to go and managing it. So I know there's lots of conversations around cloud and easy for small businesses, absolutely. But those small businesses, if they do things right, they grow, and they grow because of clients and because and so forth. And when they start to grow, then they start thinking about what is it that they're obligated to keep their business up and running. Is it stability? Is it sustainability? Is it DR? Is it continuous services? Enterprise levels are saying, listen, it costs fraction to go into the cloud. But I have one simple request. Here are my standards for security, and so forth. I want to be able to touch, and I want to be able to know that the health of my applications on the other side can be patched. I can scan, I can patch them, I can remediate them, and I can upgrade them without going through a whole bunch of logistic process. So enterprise stands the biggest value from a financial, but they also have the toughest set of standards that they actually should be putting forth on the table with the cloud provider, right? And I think that's where you see some of the challenges. So how do you mesh a single mom and pop shop to an enterprise where it's financial and so forth? You won't find trading information in a cloud that readily. You might find tabulation of that data for analytics and transaction purposes, but you won't find that level of granularity because companies like Interact and so forth, I think part of the mandate is they cannot go into the cloud because there's a whole bunch of unknowns yet that they're still trying to figure out what they need to do.
Yeah, so why is there so much friction then, right? So I think we've all been agreeing on a variety of different, maybe coming from different perspectives, but in many cases saying the same things. Yet we know in practice there often is a lot of friction between those two teams. Even at one of the companies, one of the panelists mentioned before, I'm well aware of the friction between the teams. And so why does that exist?
I think part of friction is that the fact that you have the bigger the organization, the more segregation you have within your team. So you have architecture who thinks they should take the lead, provide the blueprint, but sometimes they don't. Nice to have, but sometimes they don't. Then you have your security, which actually has the majority of your budget in most large organizations, I think, from my experience. Could be wrong. They dictate the product and so forth. Then you have a design of an engineering, a design, and so forth. Then you have a solution design team. Then you have an outsourced team that can actually do some of that stuff for you. Ideally, at the end of the day, you find really quickly that your R&D into a cloud goes productionized within a day or within a week or so forth. And that may not be okay, but the challenging part is when something breaks, no one knows who's on first.
Right.
And so I always like to look at, start from the bottom. Hey, great, I know where you want to go, business purpose, makes good business sense. This is what we need to do to make sure we hand it over. We don't want your engineering folks to be on call. We want to manage it from an operational side. This is what we need, here's how we can help you. Help me help you kind of thing, right? And part of it is that design groups are always designing great things. They're just not good at operationalizing it when it breaks.
Right.
See, I'm an engineer, and I kind of see it like infrastructure is spread out everywhere now. So like the silo lines are breaking down. CISO in our large companies taking over more of the design, or getting in quicker because of security and networking converging together. And then you also got automation and machine learning. So the collective us can no longer keep up with the pace of what's going on with security. So then you've got that piece of it that, like you said, discover, you need to automate and use artificial intelligence right away within the design. So you got to kind of take a step back and let the machine learning take over. So there's a lot of things coming into play there, but I see infrastructure everywhere. So engineering, I almost have to be a DevOps person.
Yeah,
or
I was just about to say. I was just about to say myself. Yeah, the infrastructure engineer, unless you're working in the cloud, working behind the scenes within the cloud, the on-prem infrastructure engineer is now going to be transforming into DevOps.
I think it's just a skill sprawl. That's what's happening. Versus there used to be, what I have seen at least has been less of a siloing, unless you're talking about really large companies, and more of a skill sprawl. Like now a network engineer is expected to know networking, cloud deployment. A systems engineer is expected to know cloud networking, cloud load balancing, and so on and so forth. So you're really starting to see an expansion of the skill set, and also for people a little bit of a little bit of fatigue happening from that, because I think, at least from what I've seen, it's not so much like, hey, there's two or three different teams handling this. It's one team who's now being asked to do 3 times more different things.
Yeah, that might be scale of company, because for sure in larger organizations, there'll be very distinct teams. In some cases with some joint teams for sure, but oftentimes they might be like, business unit led teams that are, might have started in this world of, shadow IT or whatever, but basically with the premise of, we can't deliver fast enough the way we're delivering technology today. We're going to try in the cloud, and nothing's going to get between these guys and where they're trying to go. So let them just go. And that has tons of disadvantages, because that's when, like Mohan was saying, something ends up breaking. It ends up they built their own service for doing this, for directory servers or authentication, or the way they're doing it, and or just simple routing or networking, and there ends up being issues with those things. And so, but I think maybe one of the general issues that causes conflict is maybe how that cloud team got started in the first place, which was, you guys are too slow, so we're going to do something different over here.
Yeah, boy, I think you just hit it there. I think people have been dying to bring up this point. The companies I've worked for, they see cloud as a separate entity, so they think they need to hire different people, create a different organization for cloud. And it starts with the mindset that cloud is different, and you need different level of skill sets and solutioning. Once you start off with that mindset, you completely separate out the rest of the company from that cloud team. And
right.
It's not.
But part of that's true, right? Like take the emotion out of it. Take the it's nothing to do with which skill set's better or who's more competent and can do their job better. It's you're dealing with entities like AWS or Azure that provide amazing capabilities to quickly build and deploy shit, like whatever you want to build and deploy. That's very difficult to repeat with the way things have always been on premises, not just because of people, but because of a lack of programmatic infrastructure, the brownfield of manually configured switches. And I mean, there's just, it sits in a world where I can't. So part of it's true, again, like removing the emotion out of it. And yes, there's a skill set difference, but there's been that sort of conflict. And some enterprises, like I'm interested in the Loblaw side, Karun, like how do you, are you in a distinct group from those that are managing on-premises infrastructure or applications and services deployed on premises?
So there is a different group in terms of corporation versus the technology. So Loblaw Digital is the more technology front, and then LCL is like more of the corporation front. So
Right.
corporation is the one where it comes more on-prem, but when it comes to Loblaw Digital, it's 100% cloud, right? Like everything is on cloud, and then there is a layer where corporation is in the process of getting into the cloud as well. Right. And then there are teams which are overlaps to teams between the two, right? Like LCL and LD, there's like an overlap team,
Right.
which is actually my team, which is working to get both on the same technology level, right? But again, as it comes to digital, how we do things are different as to how we do at LCL. So in digital, the as you mentioned before, right? Like the skill set fatigue was getting there because SRE DevOps team was expected to do a lot. Then we started pushing into the dev run model where we are doing the knowledge transfers to the devs where they can do devs and network level things at the same time, which is kind of like a DevOps mindset, right? But
Right.
the SRE team or the DevOps team cannot do everything for you. So we have to start educating them, and they have to start educating us on the dev front so that we can meet in the middle, and then we can share the same practice at an enterprise level.
Right. Right. So it sounds like, that team that sort of goes across both there is facilitating knowledge, but also probably facilitating ensuring compliance, security, or
yes.
those. Right. Okay.
Yes.
Is it a reorg, like a new pod system? Like in our company is very big, so everything is split up. So it's hard to communicate with the other groups. So do you set up a whole new hierarchy to where DevOps, engineering, like almost everything is combined within a pod, and maybe they take care of a portion of your cloud, subscription, for example. I don't know how big it would be, but
So
kind of like that. So you have all the knowledge in one area.
yeah, so I think we do have the pod system, but we do pod business line by business line. So we go by like the work streams, right? And we onboard one business at a time, and that's how we go with this whole journey, right? Like you cannot onboard everything at the same time. But again, communication, yes, it is a big challenge because the teams are very widespread, right? Like there's widespread across Canada as well at some business lines. So yes, it is a slow process. Communication is hard, but things are getting into the shape, especially once you onboard, once there is a dev run model between both the dev and the SRE team, there is an alignment, things catch up super fast. It's just that to reach there, it takes time. So we are doing pods and we are doing like one line of business at a time.
Right.
So do you have a single point of contact for any of the roadmaps from a technology, whether it be cloud or data center or anything like that? Is there a single ownership for the roadmap?
No. So because corporation is doing cloud right now, right? Like they have some businesses or they have some services that are already on the cloud. So they have their own ways of doing it. But now we are trying to formulate this one team spread out across both so that we can have like streamlines, we can have like base setups for everything to be to reach at that single point. But right now it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long journey, right?
Right. But it sounds like I'm sure there was some stumbling along the way, but it sounds like that long journey you're going through now has, obviously different teams, but has the appropriate touch points across. So it's
Yeah.
not acting completely independently.
Oh,
Some
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
some of this is process and some of it's technology, right? I mean, there's the stuff that's running up in the cloud that is only running in the cloud, that's supporting an application that's running, that as long as it meets the requirements of the organization, whatever. And then there's the stuff like, part of what we do on the DNS side that you're connecting things to the cloud. Like there's a system there that needs to work across the different domains in order to get user to cloud to application, and so can either from a DNS perspective or other related technologies that where there has to be some consistency or at least strategy to create some level of harmony between what's happening in the cloud and on premises. How do we approach those things?
Well, one thing that I was thinking as we were preparing for this DNS conversation is I'm always intrigued by the role that internet service providers have played in sandbagging or leveraging forward the cloud migration, because I know for a lot of organizations, they can be one of the breakpoints for how this logistically gets accomplished and how it meets the consistency goals you're talking about, Andrew. So I was curious, how many of you use some sort of a companion hosting process, especially when it comes to things like DNS or path selection for your own internal sites and for interfacing with cloud providers? I've seen a lot of discourse over the relationship that ISPs have or could have had and failed to have as they began moving into infrastructure as service providers, just from a simple concept of pathing or DNS services. I'm curious what the rest of the team thinks about that. ISPs helping, hurting, what do we see?
Well, yeah, I mean, ISPs have a lot. The problem is with ISPs is they offer 1,000 different services and none of them tend to be great. So when you look at when you look at an ISP and they tell you, I offer infrastructure as a service, I offer this, I look at how my ISP service provides service to me, and the first thing I see is not great. So am I going to trust my hardcore?
Right, but
yeah, I can
part
hire
of the community that works for an ISP. We respect your employer, and
I think ISPs,
but you have to look at it, right? Like,
well, I think ISPs. I think ISPs, though, service providers in general, and certainly ISPs from the perspective of, providing rapid, fast, non-MPLS network connectivity through things like SD-WAN, have become a part of direct internet access. They've become part of routing to the cloud as customers sort of virtualize tunnels as opposed to like layer 2 type connectivity. So I think they are playing a role there, moving packets.
And I think part of it is that's where they started up from, right? Where it's bandwidth, transport data across. I think the value add for ISP is that I'm transporting multiple customer data. Why am I not adding value to just transporting their data from point A to point B? Why am I just a routing protocol, right? Because I have the data. I can provide security services. I can provide DDoS. I can provide them with DNS. I can provide them with hosting services. They're coming to me anyway. Like I'm hosting part of their data, or I have the privilege of transporting their data across infrastructure that I own, that I manage.
Yeah, it's the ISP. It's the ISP dilemma at some point. Your whatever services they provide, they tend to get pushed back down to moving packets, especially for large enterprises. And I do think they can play a bit more there.
But that's where like every business goes. Like it's all they have a core, right? And every business has this, right? They have a core functionality, a core service that they provide that they may excel in. It doesn't. So generally the other services, unless they're really looking to transition to something different, are always going to get a little bit of a second, they're going to be second tier services. This is always what they're going to offer. And I think ISPs have it really tough because they have to offer a service that traverses a globe, right? There's all the moving parts within an internet, within the internet itself, right? You look at all the different, peering, all the different types of path selections, traffic engineering. That in itself is a whole business. And then so when you add other businesses like additional security, voice, SD-WAN, actually SD-WAN probably falls very closely to their core. then you find that they're not gonna, I don't believe that they're gonna really excel in there. They're gonna have a strong play no matter what, because they are on the network. They have the privilege of passing your data. They get to see it,
Right.
but they're still always gonna they have to meet their core needs. And I think
Right.
that's always gonna be something for them.
Right. So back to sort of the enterprise versus the cloud service providers, the data centers versus cloud, on things like DNS, for instance. We what we see out there is a lot of we've been working from a BlueCat perspective with companies for the last 20 years that were working towards creating harmony, creating a single control plane for this complex protocol, and ensuring that it was available everywhere, and ensuring that there was fast, correct answers no matter where the compute was. And now you're launching more compute on the cloud, and potentially, well, almost definitely, if you're building cloud native stuff, you're using like Route 53 or Azure Private DNS or Google Cloud DNS or whatever the case might be. And how much of it are you using it? Is it, how does that work? Is the world of corporate DNS now just sort of CNAMEs into cloud DNS, or is there an integration between the two? When does it make sense to use DNS there versus on premises? And what we find generally still in large enterprises is those conversations don't necessarily happen. And then at the end of the day, there's something that breaks, and a DNS resolution path that fails, and it fails because teams were working separately, and therefore they created a fragile infrastructure or a non-performant infrastructure based on the way they're doing naming. And I don't, without getting into the depths and bowels of DNS, I'm sort of curious if any of the panelists have experience on the DNS side on this sort of cloud versus on-premises world.
There's also that misconception of, as people are making decisions to move out to the cloud, a lot of things are taken for granted, at least at the management level. Right. Not saying that managers are not knowing of certain products or certain design of capabilities of systems, but the issue of, let's take DNS as an example. I've mentioned this many times in conversations with folks. A lot of senior level management just see DNS as a host name and an IP address. That's it. And they just assume, oh, it's automatically going to be there. The cloud provider provides DNS. We're just going to make it work. And they move on to the next topic of what we have to take care of, and forget about things like DNS and what we can and can't do, and how things need to be routed. Those are some of the concerns that I've seen in the past myself with previous companies that I've worked for, and or the company I've worked for where we've transitioned into several different hands. That just seems to be the going thing of taking things for granted.
Right.
Yeah.
And not having the proper tool sets in place to help support that, or your current set of tool sets don't match up with what's in the cloud.
Right. And from your perspective,
I think when you look at,
sorry, go ahead, Mohan.
No, go. So I think when you look at you kind of hit some good points there. Decisions are made at senior management, whether it's outsourcing or whether it's a service, right? And I think from a cloud provider, they see the opportunity, and they don't want to miss the opportunity. They know that this is a huge gap in medium to large organizations. So why not just add it as an added service? Hey, by the way, you know what? We can also provide DNS services. It's important to you, and this is the value of it. They can sell it. They can sell it because they understand it, and they know where the gaps are within the organization that are somewhat dysfunctional in multiple groups, not knowing who supports what and who is responsible and what is the value of DNS. So if you can sell it and you can package it up as a service, oh yeah, you'll get any executive attention.
Oh yeah, I mean, because here's how I picture this happening. You have the executive levels looking at the internal enterprise and how it's been run over the past several years or decade. Project comes in, it might take several weeks to get either physical hardware in place, time for people to spin up systems, whether they're virtual machines or physical. By the time you're done, you've already now like 3+ months into getting the system up and running, let alone getting applications now functioning and running on those systems. Now comes the cloud, and you've got this, like you're walking into an online shopping mall where it's like, oh, I'm going to pick DNS. I'm going to pick application one. I'm going to pick this load balancing. I'm going to pick this and go to my shopping cart and pay with my credit card and out the door, and I hit a button and everything's working. Okay, now I have to integrate all that with all my on-prem stuff and make it,
Right.
and I need to make it work. Those are the differences where, you know, an executive sees turnkey solutions in minutes, seconds, or hours versus what it used to take. And there's those complexities that, you know, things are not talking to each other just right.
Right.
And then you have to deal with the fact that like your internal teams are scrambling because someone stood all this up, and now they have to like, oh well, how do we do this? How do we resolve DNS?
Oh, yeah.
How do we make sure that we aren't traversing the internet to get to this box that you've put up that who knows what's on it, right? How do we secure it all?
You might get something crazy as, oh yeah, we just procured a project with a customer. We've already paid for it. Half their infrastructure is going to be in Azure, half their infrastructure is going to be in AWS, and you need to manage it from on-prem.
But how about why?
Please don't do that. That
hurts. No, but
sorry. How do you know what the inside of our network looks like? How did you figure that one out?
Well, we already paid for it. It's already happening. That's what you get told.
Oh, we spun it up. We just clicked on the AMI links and it's all up and working. So, and you're getting audited next week.
Well, I think you guys are pretty much hitting on part of the sales pitch behind why Kubernetes is such a hot thing right now. I mean, not to go too far off of it, but there is this concern that that we're oversimplifying some of the decisions that are being made because of, I think Lazaro meant it up earlier, the ease of access. The fact that we can buy into it so easily. To quote Jurassic Park, we didn't stop to think if we should, because it was that easy for us to get started. But I do have to recommend, I just have to ask a question here too. When I hear the types of DNS problems you guys are describing here, they don't speak to me a problem about migrating to cloud. They speak to me about this evolutionary conundrum that the organization has with some of the technical kind of loopholes they built themselves into. Does anybody second that opinion here at all? Is there? I see like they're directly tied to one another.
I just think like the move to the cloud is basically a skillful avoidance of tech debt for a lot of companies. Like, hey, I'm just going to move everything up.
Yeah, sliced.
Right? Like I don't worry about the past. And IT departments have, this is we IT people are notorious for this, right? We go to the shiny, right? It's brand new. The old can get moved on, right? And that's what we're fighting. That's part of what all of this is about, is that at the same time as we have this awesome new technology with a lower barrier of entry, we still have the baggage from the past, and we don't want to deal with it, but we have to. You're kind of stuck.
I think part of it too. Part of it too is that cloud can spin up anything you want, just about anything you want, relatively quickly. Right? Traditional infrastructure takes 6 to 12 months and cost of just kind of who knows what, right? So, and I think part of it is when you look at the business need for it, so going back to the purpose of what you want to do in functionality, keep in mind, time to market is everything. If a company can give you something in 2 months, right, you're not going to say no. You're going to want to listen, and you're going to want to pay attention. And then you are going to worry about operationalizing it after. That's the pain that comes back to the organization, right? So there you end up with a very broken relationship where you have no trust now between the business and IT as a whole.
Right, and I think that's part of the conflict. And it sounds like Karun at Loblaw is like you guys are, assuming at some point had that conflict, but the structure's now in place to try to drive harmony across those organizations.
Yeah, I mean, to always start with, you can always look towards like the third parties companies who offer these cybersecurities, right? Like there's like Akamai is there, Shape Securities there. Like these are dedicated companies just for these, right? Like just to make sure your journey towards the cloud, like just to help you that your journey towards cloud is secure, to save you from all those DNS attacks that's happening on your like day to day, especially with your so precious and important data, right? So I mean, it's always the part that you take. It all depends the journey that you're taking, right? You can always like there's tons of options out there for clouds, right? You can lead to third-party services. You can have your own in-house security dedicated team who can do like privacies and securities, and then you can always have like those annual audits internal before you go out to any external audit. And yeah, I mean, these are the precautions you take and the journey you take, which becomes an example out there for others to follow and migrate.
Yeah, look, and I think it comes down to you know, a few of the things we said, but you know, at some point there's architectures that go across these different areas, and there's expertise that's required to build those architectures appropriately. And there's things you can buy and services you can use to help with that process, but you need to understand where you want to get to, you know, and what the best practices are. And that's a learning journey for, you know, from like a DDI perspective. We have tons of customers with deep expertise in what they've been doing for quite some time. We want to work with them and keep working with them as they drive. We want them to be the heroes in their organization in terms of here's the best practices across these different architectures, and here's what we should be considering. Here's the potential breaking points. Here's the potential security required, you know, and sort of drive into that, because some of these technologies go across both. That doesn't necessarily mean, you know, you can only use one vendor. You know, I think, you know, in the world of IT, it's funny, like, you know, there's always a thing every year. You go to a conference and half the companies on the expo floor are pitching, you know, X is hard, we make it easy. You know, it was big data is hard, we make it easy. Kubernetes is hard, we make it easy. And it's just like the value prop of one company after the next. And half those companies don't exist the next year, or whatever the case might be. And that's a trap that people can run into, which is, oh, I know we got a problem. And this isn't, Karun, at all specific to the companies you laid out. They have very sophisticated capabilities. The point is, it's easy to say, I know, you know, okay, I'm going to get rid of my tech debt and move to the cloud, or I'm going to get rid of my tech debt or create an overlay network on top of everything that's communicating together. Like, somebody's always has what seemingly is an easy answer to the problem you have. But if that decision is made without really understanding the architecture, you end up just creating more of an unholy mess that is harder and harder to maintain. And I think that requires these teams working together and really trying to understand the requirements on both sides. You know, everything goes back to you know, is as much as we push agile type processes, especially now with DevOps and the programmatical network and everything, as much as I believe in agile type processes, at some point, everything is like a systems engineering V diagram. What are the requirements and what architectures are going to meet those requirements? And then what technology we're going to deploy to satisfy those, you know, that architecture, and then how are we going to test it? And I'm not saying the world needs to go back to waterfall. I'm saying, you know, there needs to be, as part of that architecture, the opportunity to experiment, drive new things, you know, within a certain framework. But these teams have got to talk together when these technologies are required across. And I just don't think that happens enough until an organization fails a few times and then gets to some level of maturity. But if your step one is, you know, tech debt moving to cloud, you're almost guaranteed to have that sort of siloed view. And as much as I like container orchestration, at some point Kubernetes is the new cloud. Okay, so now you're messing with me on the compliance and security side and what I'm doing on the cloud. So I'm going to go one more layer on top and go into this container orchestration that you can't even see. You know, and that's not a dig on Kubernetes. It's a great technology, but at some point, like, the puck keeps moving, you know, and now I can embed, you know, security scanners in your containers, and I can, you know, it's just, everything's going to catch up, and without addressing the actual problem from a top-down standpoint, which I think companies really need to do, is, again, especially for these things that affect the entire path from user to cloud to application.
That
love
really
what
falls
Andrew-
on the. Oh, go ahead.
I love what Andrew said there, just about how much they know about what they do, always directly proportional to being able to innovate. The woeful lack of information that I run to with clients when we start talking about this, we're saying, okay, make the right selection across service providers or service models or deployment models. And we look at the base of info that they're making these decisions off of, and you'd be lucky if it's a chorus of crickets and a smattering of reports. So often, my last adage before I kick it to Karun, it's the magic mirror effect. Cloud computing and the adventure to get there is a great way to measure your organization's sophistication and knowledge about what they do well and what they do poorly. And you will see it rear its head every time you try to migrate to cloud services across any of the service models.
I think this is kind of falls like what you were just speaking about, Andrew. It really falls into that, the people part of people process tools. You have to be able to create a culture in your company and in your teams that doesn't let that friction happen, or at the very least facilitates it, right? You still need to make money at the end of the day, right? The goal for every company is to make money. Everybody should be behind that goal. Everybody needs a paycheck. And that means that everybody has to learn to work together. And when it comes to this friction, I think there's some of that responsibility also comes into the management teams to make sure that everybody has what they need to be able to accomplish the goals, and that everybody has that this is all easy, at least low administrative effort. Because if not, then you get what you were talking about. You get all this friction, teams blaming each other for whatever, when something goes down, right? You need to have that culture is key, because you can have all the tools in the world you want, but if people don't want to engage, then you're still going to run into those pitfalls.
Let's see if there's some questions, and I think we're going to just plop those into the general channel on Slack. And I see a comment about how smart Bart is.
Graham had a question in the Zoom that he's probably going to paste into the general in a second. So I'll just read it out loud. We've talked a lot about the importance of a business case or business justification, but what are the key metrics, according to you guys, that support a move to the cloud? Kind of higher level.
I mentioned automation proficiency earlier. I'll stick to that one. If you can come up with a metric, the number of systems that are able to detect and react proactively with minimal human intervention and still adhere to policy, that's a great metric for me. It speaks to the team's ability to identify, prioritize, implement, and then migrate and move and evolve those pieces forward.
The other piece I would probably add on to that would also probably be around how fast do you need to expand and get up and running as soon as possible. I tend to lean more towards the cloud in the sense of that happening much more rapidly than in on-prem situations.
Yeah. Technologically speaking, I'm with Bart on the whole automation piece. Looking at it from from business standpoint, it's all cost. Like, you have to look at what you're doing today in your on-prem environment. You've got to look at your 3 and 5 year cost of ownership, and then you need to attack it against what you're seeing in the cloud and see if a full move is what you need, or maybe you're better fit for hybrid, because depending on what you're doing, everybody does something different, right? Some people are deploying, containers, other people are deploying full VMs. That answer can be completely different, and it can mean the difference between saving money and losing money.
I was just reading an interview the other day with AWS's Andy Jassy on the cloud side, obviously. And he said that from his perspective, if you look at global IT spending, 96% of money is still going to on-premises, not the cloud.
That was just last week, yeah.
Yeah, which I think is, one part of it is, of course, he doesn't want to say, hey, look, we're getting all the bucks. Another part is if you think about everything from headcount to data centers to compute, I don't know where he gets the 96% or how accurate that is. And I don't know when that gets to 50% or, 75% or, towards cloud. But it's pretty remarkable to me if it's anywhere near accurate, given the bills that end up being delivered by these public cloud companies to their customers, that it's only 4 or 5% of their IT spend.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I always like to tell people is when it comes to cloud, you have to understand something. You're paying for somebody else's costs to run your data center, plus the profit margin they're going to add on top. So you have to be aware of that when you make your decisions.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I wanted to throw something on there too. Anytime I get into this combo on-prem versus cloud, for me, it's a question of predictability. And we mentioned information earlier, but understanding your capital, OpEx, and expendability, and also your predictability around capacity management. If you're suffering a capacity management problem, that's usually a really good indicator that looking at a flexible cloud-based model is going to be a good idea. For a lot of us, there are going to be parts of our infrastructure that will never benefit from having flexible asset procurement. And if we don't recognize that early on, we are already losing the battle. So if we're asking infrastructure, software, or platform, and we don't know about capacity management in our organization, then we've already missed a huge target in the understanding of what best fit's going to be. Cloud fit is what we
Yeah,
call
And I think
that's how
part
you
of
find the big bills.
challenge there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge is I think the 96% could be coming to the fact that you're so busy spending money to maintain the current infrastructure that you have.
Yeah.
You don't have time to think about moving to the cloud. Keep in mind, there's two things that companies spend a large amount of money on in the on-prem. That's capacity, currency, and so forth. And the other is depreciation. So if the equipment has already been depreciated, it's not costing you, but you're basically managing this infrastructure on a limb.
Yeah.
And you hope it's not going to fail, but you
Right.
can't get off of it because your applications are too old. So now you have to figure out, can your applications be operationalized in a cloud infrastructure? It's a vicious financial
When
cycle.
you're talking about applications that old, that becomes a real question, right? Because now you're talking about like, can I even actually successfully run it in the cloud, right? That's one of the. That's.
Hey
That-
guys,
that's-
we've
that's
got
all-
one
that's
more
all.
question to deliver on.
Right. Just
We've
one point.
got-
So hold on, Dana, 1 second. That's everything that was just mentioned is the cost side of cloud. There's also the thing we're talking about before. Like I can't possibly meet my company's digitization strategy if I'm going to do that by building applications the way we've always built applications. It's just not going to happen. Sorry, Dana, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, you guys are on a really good topic. I think some of the insights from, I'm not cutting you off yet, don't worry. Some of the insights from within the general channel also point to this sort of need for, yeah, you're probably not going to, get rid of all of your on-prem stuff. It is just not realistic, and you do need to find a way to manage it. And so the question comes back to why we probably all got on this call in the first place. How and who how do you manage DNS in the cloud? Who owns that? What team? Who's got to pass that baton back and forth?
I was just making a comment on that just now in the sense of, at the end of the day, when you're dealing with a third-party cloud vendor, their responsibility is just to make sure DNS is up and it's running and it's providing the service that is being purchased. However, the on-prem DNS team's responsibility is to make sure that not only is that service being made operational, but it's also following policies, guidelines, making sure all the securities are in place, making sure that you're following any type of GDPR, FISMA, any type of securities that have to be in place. Granted, those pieces can be in place in the cloud. Again, if you purchase them, if you buy them, if you make sure all the tools and all the automations are in place, at the end of the day, it's still the on-premise portion to make sure that those pieces are there and working.
I think that brings up a skill set too. Go, Laz.
No, the cloud as well, because the applications that you're talking about that need to be secured are most likely have also been put into the cloud for cost reasons, let's say, right? So you still have to fight with all of that at the end of the day. Yeah. So you need to be able to you need to be able to figure out a way to get to bring balance to your teams. Like you can't. It's actually a really hard question who owns DNS in the cloud, because it really falls. It probably needs to fall more along the lines of business. Like what business line? I think Karun's company's probably got it pretty good. They've created a delineation that isn't based on like competition. They're creating a delineation based on function. So that's probably a better fit. And it doesn't mean that somebody has to specifically own DNS in the cloud. They don't have to be the winner. The only thing that really matters is successfully administering it. So find whoever, if you have a compatriot of yours, if you're an on-prem guy and you have a compatriot in the cloud, you need to go make friends with them, and you need to figure out how to bring your two sides together.
I think you have an opportunity where you have Amazon seeing a need to provide that service, the DNS service. I think the next thing that's going to go with that is basically user credentials. So if you have DNS and if you have a service that you already manage, why not also add the credentials as well? So it's going to become a package solution at some point, right?
Well, yeah, so let me give my answer to who owns DNS in this world.
DNS.
The answer is the developer, and I think that it's now our job as we build out these infrastructures to ensure that we're building infrastructures that fundamentally work, that communicate with each other, that can be changed, even provisioned and deployed as part of that system by the person launching the applications or making the changes. I think part of what this world of cloud brings to the way things used to work on premises is this idea that somebody stands between you and the change you want to make, and they're going to add their expertise into that. And that needs to go away, because as we deploy things now, that's going to create change, update, DNS. And I need to do that concurrent. And so therefore it's our job to make sure that the right DNS, the DNS that's going to provide the appropriate amount of coverage and connectivity, needs to work, even if I'm building a silo over there, a silo over there, but fundamentally needs to facilitate deploying and changing these applications. And so I think when we look at what infrastructure team owns it, we're almost asking the wrong question. The infrastructure teams need to build a DNS that works, that can be owned by the people that want to make changes to it. The service, whoever said that before, wrap this thing up as a service, be a champion of it, and deploy it. And I think that's where these infrastructure teams need to come together.
Do you think DDI, like authoritative IP, DHCP, DNS together? So like say there's a cloud DDI vendor, I don't know if there is right now, but like a IPAM DDI across all platforms. So it's authoritative because, for example, containers are going to change all the time. You're going to spin up, spin down. There's going to be IP, but the DNS can possibly stay the same. So I would almost contend that a DDI solution with development together as one platform would be a good fit. I don't know.
No, so look, we think that IPAM should include everything that's happening on the cloud, and we think that a sort of corporate spanning DDI system should be aware of and understand any other DNS that might have been deployed from an authoritative standpoint in the cloud, because it had to be deployed because we're using elastic load balancers or whatever the case might be. It has to work together. And so, from a vendor standpoint, we can't live in this world where we think everything should be BlueCat anymore. What we should be thinking is everything needs to work, and we ensure it all works, and so, we're sort of out of time, and I don't want to make this a product pitch, but my point is that I think when you start the question or pose the question as like it's one or the other, that's when there's a fundamental problem with the question itself. It's got to be, DNS is built as a system of delegation, and an appropriately administered DNS system doesn't necessarily need to be all in the same technology, but it's got to work together. Anyway, we can continue the conversation on Slack, but we are out of time. We're losing panelists. We're going to lose other people. I want to thank all the panelists. I think this was a really good talk. It's hard to focus in on one topic. We got some notes during it. Let's talk more and more DNS. And we tried to steer it that way a couple of times, but this is such a meaty topic. We're not all a bunch of, I'm a DNS head. Not everybody on the panel is, but we all have struggled with or worked with these different parts of infrastructure, and I think shared some really interesting best practices and discussion. And so I just want to thank you all for joining. We look forward to your feedback on Network VIP, and we'll talk to you guys next time.